Hello and welcome to the Total Soccer Show. I am Daryl Grove and I'm joined by a man who is still moving house, just like yesterday. It's Taylor Rockwell. Hello.
Hello. Yeah, as I said on Facebook, I think, it took us 12 minutes this time to figure out that we had too much stuff. That's what happens every time we move. It's sort of like you just forget how much like sprawl and accumulation you have.
So did you leave some behind?
Yes. Yeah, we jettisoned quite a few things. Yeah.
Anything major?
Yeah, well, basically, we've always been renting. This is a view behind the curtain. We've always rented, and now that we own, one of the things we read that was like the best thing to do when you're buy your first home is to like really evaluate, are you really going to fix that? Because we have so many things that I've been like, I'm going to fix that one day. That zipper, I'm totally going to fix. I'm going to fix that button. And I just got rid of all that stuff. So anything that I've been putting off for like...
Fixed in a different way.
Yeah, basically. Fixed in the sense of donated or thrown into the alley. One or the other.
Well, speaking of things that won't be taking places, the US, it's not funny, the US women's national team will not be going to the semi-finals of the Olympics because they are out at the quarter-final stage, losing on penalty kicks to Sweden after a 1-1 draw.
This is true.
And we've just watched it, right? The game finished maybe half an hour ago.
Yeah.
We're kind of in shock because we really expected, historically we expected the US to make the final because they always do, right? All golds and 1 silver since 96.
Yeah, literally they have always made the finals of the Olympics. Yeah.
Or the gold medal matches, I believe it's called. And second, like looking at this team, world champion team, with, we said, some upgrades in the likes of Mallory Pugh, Crystal Dunn, etc. We thought maybe they were going to do really well in this tournament, and they met their match. And it was a defensively shaped Sweden.
Yes. Much to the chagrin of certain players. But yeah, I'll take the heat there and say, in my tournament preview, I said I thought the United States was going to run this group, run this tournament.
Those were your actual words.
Yeah,
right?
It was sort of my feeling I had that it was going to eclipse that conversation we've had about who's the best team ever, because it was you win the Olympics, you win the World Cup, you win the Olympics again. It's kind of closed for discussion, right? And it just felt like this team had upgraded, as you said, was stronger all around, and with a smaller player pool for every single team, it felt like they were more talented pound for pound. And maybe they were, but it didn't matter when you're playing PS Sundhaga, Sweden.
And they will come back to the United States with no more metal than they left with.
This is true.
Right? No bronze, no silver, no gold. Quarterfinals is just out. This is kind of a disaster for US women's soccer.
We said off air that, you're correct in saying it. It's weird to say, but this is the worst ever performance from the U.S. women at an Olympics.
Statistically.
Right? Yeah, it is. And then you can make it they crashed out in the quarterfinals. And it's a little bit disingenuous, but it's still accurate that it's a team that people expected more from, including myself.
So shall we talk about how this happened?
Sure.
I think we've got to start with Hope Solo's reaction, which was something along the lines of the better team didn't win, I think. And she basically called Sweden cowards for playing defensively. Have I paraphrased that correctly?
Yeah, and then when asked to clarify that comment by, I believe, Grant Wall in the mix zone, she said essentially that the United States tried to attack, tried to do different things. Sweden just tried to defend, just played physical. That was their game plan, and they executed it. But in the end of the day, they won and were going home. But it was still very... Oh,
so it's not as harsh as it originally sounds.
It's still pretty harsh, and because I paraphrased it...
The word cowards is tough, I suppose.
Yeah, and it's a very... I understand that she's speaking in the heat of the moment when she's really frustrated and very sad by what's happened, but it still belies a lack of understanding of how the game works. That they're not going to play the way you play because you think they should. Yeah. They're going to play a system that is set to oppose your system and oppose it in a positive way for that team, and that's what they did. They basically structured their lineup in such a way and their tactics in such a way,
and we'll get into
that it negated what the U.S. was trying to do. And then, we said from the very early outset of that game that it looked like Sweden were bunkering and hoping to hit on the break. That's what they did, and that's what they did successfully.
Yeah, I think cowardly implies really sitting, crouching, looking scared, right?
Or cheating, kind of, and just kicking out at people. And there was definitely fouls, but I wouldn't say that was cowardly. I'd say that was a consistent game plan.
So let's talk about what it is that Pia Sundhage had Sweden doing specifically, because it really was a really smart defensive setup that I would say the US almost completely failed to break down. And I think it starts with... the opposite of what I saw against Brazil, which is they had sort of this 4-3-3 and not enough defence on the wings, and Brazil cut through them too much. This time, I think the two wide players, Alen, who was magnificent, by the way, and Jakobsen came back to form essentially a 5 across midfield that really was like a a toll booth that was very expensive. You know what I'm saying? The US had a low balance on their Easy Pass.
or a toll booth that required like such weird random items that you just couldn't get through. Because that's what it felt like. It was like the United States tried a variety of different things, and every time the toll booth operator in the form of that Swedish midfielder was just like, nah, that's not going to work. No, that one, we won't take that either. That's not allowed.
So the core of it to me is the three central midfielders. Number 7, Dahlqvist, who sits the deepest. Number 17, Seeger is like ahead and to the left. And number 9, Aslani, ahead and to the right. That's like your 3 sort of backwards triangle. I guess a triangle is never backwards, but triangle with Dahlqvist at the base.
Yes.
Right? And then they didn't just sit there, because that is kind of cowardly.
Right.
What they did is when the US tried to go down, say, the right, then Alen, the left winger, would defend, and Seeger, the left central midfielder, would go over there, and Dahlqvist would sort of shuffle that way. The US would be like, okay, that toll's closed. We'll go to this other one. Maybe that's full service. And they go over there, and then Aslani shuffles to the right. Dahlqvist shuffles across, Seeger shuffles across, and Jacobson's there, and Samuelson's there, the right back behind. Right. No way through.
And that might sound like a very basic defensive approach if you're familiar with like the idea of moving to defend the ball. But I think
unison. It's about unison, right?
Yeah. Unity, yeah. But it's also, I was like, wait, what? Unison? I thought venison for a second. I got
moving
confused.
in unison.
Yeah, there you go. But I think it's also about like the juxtaposition of that Brazil game with this game, that if you are the U.S. team approaching this game, you think, oh, they're not going to do that. They're going to crowd the middle. They don't want us to pass through. So if we go wide, we'll be fine. And then all of a sudden you have the team moving over. You've got forwards coming in to cut off that back pass. And it's sort of like, wait, this is not what we were expecting. So then you have to adjust your thinking a little bit. And once you're the one adjusting, you're the one having to react. And you're not on the front foot the way I think the United States expected to be and wanted to be.
And I think they just had to find the sort of the non-toll roads, which were the very far wide ones. I've chosen it and I'm going with it. Yeah. So you can't go down the middle, right? Which is what the US prefer to do, right? They like to get the ball into the feet of Morgan and Lloyd and then sort of build around from there. Right. So they would go they'd have to work really hard just to get the ball out wide and eventually get a cross in. And I would say that the quality of delivery was not good enough. It was good maybe half the time was a good ball. Even when it was good, you've got the 2 centre-backs, Nilla Fischer, who we talked about beforehand, and Sembrant, her partner, number 3, heading it away. Yeah. Central defensive partners just heading balls away all day, or even getting there with their feet, which I think is a condemnation of a cross if you clear it with your feet.
Yes, I think so. and it also speaks to, I would say, because the United States put in lots of crosses, obviously, but they weren't all under pressure. Like, some of them were intentionally low. Tobin Heath, I recall a couple different times, putting in low-driven crosses, and it seemed like they were designed to have runners meeting them, to have runners coming from one side, sprinting in, and creating, like, disarray in that box. And
There was a clever Tobin Heath free kick where she deliberately fired it in low, and Johnston ran across the back, but it didn't quite get there. And it's, again, I think Swedish defenders were just sort of very proactive. But when the ball came in, they were sort of, I'm getting there first. Right.
And then even if we want to continue with the toll booth metaphor, it was like, so they've been told, no, you have to have $5. You have to have $5, otherwise you're not getting through. And so Jill Ellis was like, oh, Megan Rapinoe always has $5 on her. We'll bring her on. She'll be able to do this. Megan Rapinoe shows up. And she's like, I have $5, but they're Danish kroners. I have 5 Danish kroners. That won't work? And then she was brought right off. So even when they thought they were prepared, they weren't prepared.
I mean, she's the best crosser of the ball. Definitely on this US team, maybe in the world. I can't say that I've seen. I've evaluated all the crossers in women's football internationally, but obviously, she's a player that you definitely want crossing the ball, right? And even that wasn't good enough. I mean, again, there's no Abby Wambach on the end of it. You've got Carly Lloyd's good in the air, Alex Morgan's good in the air, Ali Long's good in the air, Julie Johnson's good in the air. None of them are Abby Wambach. And none of them are Wendy Renard either.
That's true. Maybe I'm letting specific incidents cloud the way I remember these. But the one that really stands out in my head, though, is that corner kick that Megan Rapinoe took that she hit long and wide directly out of bounds. Yeah. And the commentators were sort of like, oh, she tried to bend that one into the far post. Didn't quite work. And I guess it just sticks out of my head as if you're bringing this person in because they are a set-piece, free kick, assist specialist, and then one of the first things they do is kick it directly out of bounds. It says to me that maybe they're still not. I agree with you. She's a very good crosser of the ball. It just seems like maybe she's not back to either full fitness or full confidence to where she feels like she's got the mechanics down fluidly. She was subbed in and later subbed out. I want to put that to the side a second, though, because I want to keep us chronological. Yeah, sure. Because what happens is Sweden score first in roughly the 60th minute. And it is exactly the kind of thing we're talking about. The US, I think, played kind of a direct ball into the box. Nilla Fischer gets there first. Ali Long, heads it down.
And then it's quick interplay between the three central midfielders, and it's Dogfist in the end, or is it Aslani? I can't remember actually. Launches that ball, plays that ball between the two US centre backs it's not Rolfo at that point, right? She's come off and is replaced by Blackstenius. Plays that ball between two centre backs. Blackstenius goes hip to hip with Becky Sauerbrunn, wins the physical challenge, wins the pace challenge, gets herself more or less one-on-one with Hope Solo. Julie Johnson, last minute, slide tackle, coming in like Han Solo at the end of Star Wars, but it was as if Han Solo missed, and fires it into the low corner.
Yep. And I want to say two things about that. Number one, yeah, you're right. So it starts with the header. It's 5 players. It's a total of 7 touches before that ball is in the back of the net. Yeah, and that ball from Dahlqvist, it is Dahlqvist who splits those two center backs. And it's sort of where, again, not to go back to Hope Solo, but I am going to. She has this idea that it's like, it's just smash and grab, and they got lucky. But if you watch that, it's a perfect demonstration of how technical those Swedish players are. That it's so few touches, but it's boom, 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 boom. It's quick passing. And then that ball through, it's not long over the top hoping for pace. It splits to and it bends around Julie Johnson. So even the angle she takes initially, she has to correct because she thinks it's going wide and then it bends back in. So now she has to change. Becky Sauerbrunn the same. And by the time she changes, she's now behind instead of alongside the striker.
It is a magnificent counter-attack.
It absolutely is.
Going all the way back to the first header by Fischer, it's not just a get it out of here header. It's a header to the feet of, I believe, Seeger. I can't remember which one of the three midfielders gets it first.
It's Aslani, Seeger, and then Dahlqvist.
Okay, so it's a header directly to the feet of Aslani. So it's a defensive header that's also a pass, which is perfection.
Joe Grove appreciates. Yeah, and then at that point, it was strange because obviously we would prefer the United States win and advance, but at that point, 60th or so minute, we're sort of like, oh boy, we got a half an hour ahead of us. We were excited, and I guess so were the United States, because then they really start pouring it on.
So Jill Ellis, to her credit, she was, okay, all in, let's make some attacking changes. Right? I think it's Ali Long off, Crystal Dunn on is the first change, right? You get Crystal Dunn sort of up top, Carly Lloyd comes back into midfield, but really she's still attacking from there. So it's immediately much more attacking. Later in the game, she'll bring in... who else comes in?
Well, she brings in Megan Rapinoe, takes off Kelly O'Hara, and drops Tobin Heath to right back.
That's the weird change, right?
So that's real attacking. And then, Megan Rapinoe eventually comes off. So it's just a lot of strange changes thrown in there to try to make something happen.
But super positive attacking changes, which I would argue is what gets the US the equaliser.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And it's super positive attacking changes in response to what Sweden are doing. Because as you said, Crystal Dunn comes in but goes up top and stays more central. Drops Carly Lloyd back so that now they can maybe try to have some creative playmaking through the middle, and then you try to maybe frustrate that Sweden midfield that's shifting from one side to the other, doing a very good job of staying unified. Yeah. Then maybe you can find some avenues for passing and you get a goal. And that's kind of what happens. So Alex Morgan gets the equaliser in the 80-something minute, around about the 80th. It is a clash between Rapinoe and Aslani is down. The US do not play the ball out of play. I think we have to talk about this because this is a talking point. So the US essentially play 11v10 for about a minute and score during that period. How do you feel about that? Well, it's strange because the United States also did this in the first, like in the 14th or 15th minute, I believe. This happened again, and they kept playing, and then eventually... This is when Rolfo came out after the challenge with Johnston, And so it seemed like maybe that was an indicator that was the U.S. mentality. It's like, no, we're going for it. Unless that player is dead, we're going to keep playing. But I also understand it, that like if it's the 81st minute, you're trying to win the game, I get why you wouldn't do it. So I think I'm okay with it, even though it's not the greatest sportsmanship. You're under no obligation to do it, right? No, and if anything, it's maybe you can criticize the Swedish defense for sort of switching off a little bit and then being frustrated that like, oh, you guys aren't just giving us the ball back. Like, it's not their prerogative to do so. It's your prerogative to defend and stay alert and not let Crystal Dunn sort of win a header and flick it on into the face of one of your defenders. I would say the Swedish defenders don't protest after the goal. No, they don't. They don't go arguing about that. I think because they're just smart enough to know it's done with, right? It's already happened. Yep. So it's Rapinoe. I think she gets the ball and she's like it's midair, right? She goes up to get it. I don't think it's dangerous play, but then Aslani runs into her. I don't think it's a foul either. It's kind of just unfortunate. Yeah, I think so because Rapinoe does win the ball, but it's also not. It's strange because I guess you could say that this is the reason why it is a foul, is because she's got her foot in the air and doesn't know anyone's around her. But I would say it's not as though she's going into a challenge and raises her foot and kicks a player. It's like she is settling the ball that's been kicked long and then gets run into. So it's almost like her foot makes contact, but it might also be that the player makes contact with her foot.
Yeah.
So
right.
I'm okay with it.
So
there's other plays that are a little less defensible, a little more curious.
Right.
Yeah.
So there's play continues. The ball is played sort of into the box, over the top, looking for Crystal Dunn. Is it Tobin Heath plays it in? Dunn doesn't get there. She absolutely doesn't get there the way she intends, right? She's going for a head, or maybe for a ball to run onto.
Yeah.
But it does hit her in the back, which takes the right back Samuelson by surprise. Then the ball bounces into her face, and then that ball lands into the path of Alex Morgan.
Yes.
What I'm getting at is it's a lucky goal. It's not being created through technique and vision and something being crafted. They really stumbled into this goal.
It's like we've seen.
I took it at the time, but when you're judging this performance, going back and judging, you're sort of like, oh, we didn't even really craft a proper chance.
Unless, we've talked about it multiple times, that the United States would keep that player wide and then basically distribute out wide, get the ball back inside, and that's where the goal would come from. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And maybe this time they just bypassed that player out wide and instead played it off at their opponent's face. And they used that player as their wide player. So you never know.
It took me, I'm going to bank it off that right back.
Exactly. That's just how good they are. But no, I take your point that even that goal, it comes from a long ball kicked over the top of traffic because, again, Sweden are keeping that shape and keeping it disconnected from the defense to the attack. And there you go. So it does end up as a goal, but it alleviates a lot of pressure, obviously, because at that point it's 1-1.
Yeah.
But it doesn't give you an idea that like the United States have figured it out, they've unlocked the Swedish defense, and now, as you mentioned before, they're going to, the floodgates are open, it's going to be 4-1 in the final. Instead, it's 1-1, and we go to extra time.
And in extra time, Megan Rapinoe, who entered the game in the final half an hour, or a little later than that, comes off, right? In round about, the 100th or so minute, Megan Rapinoe subs out.
Yep.
For Christen Press, I believe. This felt weird to me.
Yes, to the extent that you and I... So I think I had left the office. I came back in a couple minutes. I think she comes off in the 108th, and that's exactly when I walked out. So we came back in, and all of a sudden Press was in there, and I always get Kristen and Crystal. It's
Christen Press.
Yeah, Christen Press, I know. But I always get a little second-guessy there. She was on the field, and we're both like, wait a minute. And we really did go through the entire team. We're like, do they have 12 players on the field? Because we both just assumed that Rapinoe was still there. And only after a couple minutes, we were like, wait, Rapinoe isn't there anymore. What is happening? Because it was just not a thing that we expected to be happening.
So this is version 2.0 of starting Rapinoe against Colombia and bringing her off after 30 minutes. Now it's bringing her in for the final 30 minutes and then a bit of extra time and then bringing her off.
Yeah. And I think you said when Rapinoe came on that, like, if this goes to or extra time, this could be a problem because she's not fully match fit and we're not sure what's going to happen. And in the end, maybe Jill Ellis wasn't either. But it shows because then if you don't have that extra substitution that you have in the Olympics because they're trying out the extra time.
Fourth sub in extra time. Yeah.
Right. You could have been a problem because Mallory Pugh did have to go off with an injury to that right ankle. We saw her iced up with no shoe on anymore as the penalties were being taken. So it could have been a big problem if there hadn't been that extra substitution.
So what do we feel about the substitution, though? Because, for example, Rapinoe, I know her crosses weren't quite what we were expecting or hoping for. She was involved in the goal. She did win that ball in midfield and crush Aslani and start that play. So bringing her in did make a difference.
Yeah. I think by the same token, you could maybe even make the argument that if you leave her in, she's a penalty taker, and maybe she's the type of person you want stepping up as a veteran who's got that ice in the veins to make something happen. But I think hindsight's always 20/20, and I think it would be a little bit unfair because it's not like anything amazing happened when she came off or even when she was on. Because you're right, she's involved, but it's not like she was the direct distributor of that goal. And by the same token, nothing horrendous happened once she came off. So it's kind of like it was curious, but I don't think it's necessarily as big of a talking point as I expected it to be.
So before we talk penalty kicks, we've got to talk about the brief exchange of disallowed goals.
Yeah, sure.
Which is really odd, right?
Yeah.
So Carly Lloyd has it in the back of the net. It's around about the 118th minute, right?
Yeah.
It's called... I think initially we thought it was called for offside, which was unfair because she wasn't offside. But we think now it's called for a push, right?
Right. It's either a push or a pull. Either way, you can see
both
her.
Of which you can't do.
Yeah. It's basically a cross coming in and she's tracking it. So is the defender, and all of a sudden the defender falls down. I watched the defender's legs. Her feet do not get tangled up. So it seems like Carly Lloyd raises her hands, it might be just to check where the defender is, or her positioning, and maybe she does so too aggressively. Maybe the defender does just fall on her own accord, but the referee sees those hands up, rightly or wrongly says that's a foul.
You know, I think it is a push. I remember watching this the first time. The defender pushes Lloyd to begin with.
Oh, really?
Before the ball comes in. It's just that little thing where, as a defender, where you sort of push the attacker away from you because you don't want them crowding your space and forcing you back.
Yeah.
So it may be a slight retaliatory push.
Yep.
Maybe what Lloyd has got called for there.
Yeah.
But then, ball up the other end quickly, and I think it's Shailene has the ball in the back of the net, and then she is called for offside.
Right. And she is not offside.
She's not offside, is she?
In any way, shape, or form.
So there are two reasons she's not offside, Tyler, and I cede the floor to you to explain.
Okay,
that.
well, and this actually happened for the U.S. earlier. So I think some people would say, oh, the refs blew 3 different calls because there was one where they let the United States stay onside, and I forget who it was, but the shot went wide or was saved. But it looked like that player was clearly offside. But what happened is the United States played it, and then it went off of a Swedish defender. The Swedish defender tried to head it clear. It flicked off and went into the path of that U.S. attacker. Because the new rule changes, that player tried to play the ball and made contact.
The Swedish player?
Yeah, it's then onside for the U.S. Okay. Same thing here.
Yeah, tell me what happens with Shailene. Why is she not offside twice?
First of all, it's because the ball comes from a U.S. essentially back pass, accidental back pass. But they're trying to clear it, they misclear it, and it falls to her. So I think that's number one, is that it comes from a U.S. player. But also she's not offside because she's even with Becky Sauerbrunn when that pass happens.
I think so too.
And so it seems like either way she shouldn't have been called offside, but she was. And it would have been a goal. And I think if that had been called back and then the United States wins on penalties, it's a talking point about how, they're favoring the U.S., they want their biggest names in the final, this is, unfair. But in the end, that's not what happened.
It goes to penalty kicks.
Right.
Alex Morgan misses the first kick. Then the US get it back together. It's all level because Hope Solo saved one. Christen Press steps up, misses the final penalty kick. Unfortunately, she's the one that is the face of this defeat, which I think is really harsh on her.
I think so too.
But that's just kind of the way it rolls sometimes when you're the fifth penalty taker. And I know you have a theory.
I have 2 theories.
You have 2 theories. It's kind of like that Jim Carrey movie when you start seeing the same number patterns everywhere. But I think there may be something to it.
Okay. Well, if you want to see the patterns here, we'll start with the U.S. Every single U.S. kick taker. Now, Christen Press, it's tough to say because we didn't see any replays of her take. From my angle, it looks like she aims to the left and it goes over. But I would say every single U.S. taker aims to the left. And you have Alex Morgan. She misses the first one. Press misses the last one. In between, Sweden's goalkeeper picks up on this trend. And the last 3 U.S. takes, she guesses correctly every time.
Yep.
So by the time Christen Press
Lloyd,
steps up...
Brian...
and Lindsey Horan, who subbed on. So she takes one, they all make, and then I think Christen Press steps up and essentially is like, everyone's gone to the left.
We've been rumbled.
I want to go to the left, but the goalkeeper knows I'm going to go to the left, so I better put it to my left, that is. So I better put it high. Yeah. And I think that's what she's thinking, is basically, you've got to put it high, and in the end, she puts it over. So that's one theory. The other one, if you want to look at the trend, is that Sweden alternated every single time the direction that their kicks went. Yeah. They went left, right, and then right. And I think... just maybe Hope Solo caught onto that pattern, and that's why she guesses incorrectly at the very end, because I think she thinks that pattern's going to continue, and it's broken for that last kick, and that's why it ends up with a goal.
So can we also talk, before we talk about the gamesmanship that Hope Solo attempted to employ, can we talk about Hope Solo's weird penalty kick technique? Because I have literally never, ever seen this before.
Oh, what, the non-dive?
Yeah.
Yeah. So the shuffle? It's a thing that you don't usually see, is the shuffle as opposed to the dive.
And I was kind of going out of my mind for the first 2 that Sweden score, right? Because what Solo does is she just sort of shuffles she picks left or right, and she just shuffles left or right. And then if they go the other way, or if they go high like they did, I think, the first one, it looks like you've just almost made no effort to save it, right? But when she eventually does make the save, it all becomes clear to me.
Right.
I think... she shuffles to one side because if you've chosen correctly the side, then you're filling the entirety of that side, right? So if you dive low to the right, you've guessed the right way. They go high to the right, you're not getting it.
Right, we see that all the time.
You shuffle to the right, you fill the whole thing, you got it.
This is true. If you guess right.
Yeah,
and if you're able to get across it in time. She guessed right twice, actually, but only saved it once, unfortunately, for her. Yeah.
There's a higher percentage chance of getting it if you do this move, theoretically.
Yeah. But I think it still requires you... I mean, if it's a really strongly hit penalty, you're never going to get there in time. Because
you can't
have to
shuffle
shuffle across. Yeah, it's just not going to work. So I see the logic behind it. I don't necessarily know if it works that well. It might also be, and I think this is a possibility, that we've talked about Hope Solo is very aggressive as a goalkeeper, that I think she sometimes can be too aggressive. And it's possible that she knows that and knows that if her technique is to come out and dive, she's going to be off her line every time, and then it might be recalled because she's 3 yards off her line when the penalty's taken.
It's a self-imposed
So maybe it's like a self-imposed, I'm just going to shuffle, I'm not leaving this line, I'm just going to slide one way or the other. So I think that's interesting. I don't think her I need new gloves technique was particularly interesting.
Yeah, however. So this is for the final penalty kick. I'm sorry, I've forgotten the taker.
I believe it is Dahlqvist, the aforementioned player of the beautiful through ball, can also hit a beautiful penalty, it turns out.
So as she steps up, Solo steps out and says, I don't think there's any truth to this. She says that she needs to change gloves for some reason. And that's what she gets. So she has to argue with the refs for it a little bit. US sort of team, I guess a kitman comes on and changes her gloves for her. And you can see the look on her face is, I'm doing this to mess with you.
Well, yeah, because for a second I was like, maybe her hand is hurt. It looked, and you could see it on the wide angle. She runs up to the sideline official, and it looks like she's maybe protesting that something has been done incorrectly. And then it cuts to her, and she's really like, no, my hand hurts. She's like shaking her hand like, it really, really hurts. And then once they start changing her gloves, it's that steely-eyed, it's game time.
Yeah.
And the point that I think you realize, or at least I realized, this hasn't worked, is when the camera cuts to Dahlqvist and she's just grinning. She's like, I know what you're doing, and this is not accomplishing what you think it is. Because if it cut to her and she has that, like, oh no, deer in the headlights, like, this is more time for me to think.
Yeah.
But instead, it's more time for her to, I guess, talk to Seeger, who came up and put an arm around her.
I think Kate Margraf, the announcer, sort of mentions this. It's not on camera, I don't think, but Seeger, the captain, sees what's happening, and so goes over to talk to Dahlqvist in her moment when she could have been just left alone at the 12-yard spot with too much time to think. Well, we both know, right? If you have too much time to think, you can get in your own head. Things can go wrong. That's what Solo's trying to do to her.
And
Seeger saved her.
And in the end, it doesn't really work because it doesn't work at all because Dahlqvist finishes that penalty and Sweden advances.
And the US goes out.
Yep.
All right, so let's quickly look back at, I would say, this game and this whole tournament in terms of the US not really breaking down teams the way we expect them to.
Yeah, I mean, it starts, I would say, relatively strong with New Zealand, given that the United States tend to struggle early in tournaments. To come in, get a 2-0 win, things look good. You beat France 1-0. France, who many people said was going to be one of the best teams the United States would face in this tournament.
But they didn't really break France down.
This is true.
Yeah.
And then you have Colombia, so there are definitely warning signs that maybe people, myself included, chose to be like, those are just like sort of cautionary tales on the way. And
they'll pick it up as the tournament goes on, right?
And I also think in the same way that if you're seeing a lot of previews for the Premier League, which we'll talk about later on, how you're seeing a lot of people say like, well, Hull are terrible, but with Leicester, you can't write them off. I think some people remember the 2015 World Cup for the win, where they started slow and didn't look very good, and a lot of people wrote them off, and then they won. And so I think people, myself included, didn't want to say, this team doesn't look very good, or this is a problem. It's sort of like, they'll figure it out. They'll get it together. They're the U.S., they're going to do it. And I think one person who thought maybe they won't was Pia Sundhage.
What did Pia Sundhage say?
I think she thought, well, we can frustrate them and play physical and knock them off the ball a little bit and make them work for it, and maybe they won't be able to make it work.
Well, turns out she was right. So what do we do next, Tyler? What happens next? Jill Ellis signed a deliberately non-specific, quote, multi-year contract, is what US Soccer put it out there as, and everybody reported multi-year contract. It seems, after the 2015 World Cup win, right, it seems to be a contract that has lots of options to keep her involved, which says to me that she's probably not going to lose her job after this.
She won't. Honestly, I think that contract is more about the fact that the United States women's team has such high expectations that you give a low bonus, or you give a low base pay, and then with the expectation of like, when you make the World Cup final, you get an extra $500,000.
Right.
And so I think they will probably keep.
Do you know
her,
that for a fact?
No, but that would be my guess. Whereas I think you incentivize coaches where there's maybe like high expectations, and maybe the federation doesn't have much money, or as we know, isn't too inclined to give the women's team too much money. So I would say that's probably why you have that, as opposed to Jurgen Klinsmann, who I think makes 10 times more than she does.
What I'm asking is, do you feel comfortable with the idea of Jill Ellis seeing this team through from 2016 now and going up to the 2019 World Cup? Because that's when the next tournament is. It's a whole 3 years away.
I think the only reason why I would say no is just that I don't think the U.S. lost because of anything Jill Ellis necessarily did wrong. I think you could make some arguments about Megan Rapinoe's inclusion in the squad, where she was played, how long she was played. But generally speaking, I think I'm okay with it. The only thing I would be concerned about is that tendency that coaches have to stick with what got you there. Mm-hmm. And so you stick with, well, this is the player who I trust, who I know can do it.
There's an argument that that's exactly what happened with Rapinoe, right? If Rapinoe hadn't been sort of one of the go-to World Cup 2015 players, and, I understand that we talked about it before. One of the reasons she's in the squad is that she's awesome.
Yeah.
And, people love her.
I think also, locker room. I think she's a locker room presence.
Stuff. But there's an argument that maybe... a coach who hadn't won a World Cup with Rapinoe isn't so into that idea and sees an injured player and instead brings Heather O'Reilly or someone who is a bit more explosive maybe.
So that could be a worrying sign. And again, I don't watch enough NWSL to say this with confidence, but I've seen multiple people saying that Hope Solo isn't playing as strongly as she has in the past, that maybe other goalkeepers really need to be given a serious shot at that number one spot. If for no other reason than maybe to make Hope Solo elevate her game a bit more. Mm-hmm. I don't know if Jill Ellis is going to do that because I think she has that relationship with Hope Solo, and I think that, she's been there, so I don't know if necessarily she's going to change. That's my only criticism. Outside of that, I would say no, you stick with Jill Ellis. One sort of bad tournament. It's weird to say that getting knocked out in the knockout round is a bad tournament, but it is for the U.S. Does not negate winning the World Championship. So I think you stick with her and see what happens in qualifying.
Maybe the way to look at this is, right, she won the World Cup, Jill Ellis, and she began this sort of transformational period, right, where you're bringing in new players like Mallory Pugh, like Lindsay Horan, etc., Ali Long, Crystal Dunn, and you're also changing the style of play where the US becomes more of a pass it on the floor team instead of a physical get the ball in the box kind of team. And maybe this Olympics came too soon.
Yeah,
maybe we just need to wait and see over the next couple of years to see how if the US can progress and actually change style and with these new players.
Yeah, and I think Jill Ellis can be the one to help the United States change that style, adapt, evolve, continue to try to play more technical than long ball directness that maybe they've done in the past.
And if it doesn't go well in the next couple of years, because it's still probably the She Believes Cup, the Algarve Cup, then she can get the Tom Samani treatment, right?
Yeah,
maybe. So it doesn't have, we don't have to wait all the way to 2019 to see how things are going.
We do not.
Okay, before we talk Premier League, Taylor, we have 3 quick scouting reports to read out. We have received many, many, many scouting reports this week. We haven't had time to get to all of them because you decided to change your address and take all your things with you.
Thanks for that.
But we have three to read out today and many more next week. First scouting report comes from Guy Yedwab. Guy is scouting Serge Gnabry, Arsenal's German attacking midfielder / winger / forward. Guy says Arsenal's Gnabry has scored 4 in 3 for Germany at the Olympics. So Gnabry on the score sheet. Also, I noticed Germany plays Portugal in the quarterfinal on Saturday, which means he's very likely to be unavailable for Arsenal against Liverpool on Sunday.
I'd say so. Also still active in the Olympics is Gabriel Jesus, scouted by Tyler Dunaway. Tyler emailed after Brazil's 4-0 win over Denmark to say Brazil made the switch to a 4-2-4 tonight, and it definitely paid off for Gabriel Jesus. He scored the goal shown in this tweet, which probably doesn't work too well for audio.
You want to read out the URL?
I could do that, no. Nothing special about that goal, but it got his confidence back, and he looked much better in this game. His work rate really sticks out. He's always working very hard and never afraid to try something difficult.
Gabriel Jesus is now a Manchester City player. We know that for a fact, right? But he has been loaned back to Palmeiras in Brazil. But if you want to see him in action, is that you saying?
Speaking of Brazil, they play Colombia in the quarterfinal in the Olympics on Saturday.
That is a game that I think will be worth watching.
I would say so.
Remember watching Colombia U23s against
Yeah, they're
US?
pretty decent. And let's not talk about that anymore. Instead, let's talk about Alen Halilovic, shall we?
Yeah, scouted by Julie Nishimura Jensen. Alen Halilovic, former Barcelona player. Barcelona sold Halilovic to Hamburger SV for €5 million, says Julie. They inserted a 2-part buyback clause in his contract. They can buy him back for €10 million after the first year, 12.5 after the second year. Halilovic is smiling in his photos with the Hamburger shirt, even though he said that he hoped to remain with Barcelona, or if not that, at least in La Liga. I assume he is bravely hiding his broken heart. He had his debut this past Saturday in a pre-season friendly, a 1-0 win over Stoke, coming into the game in the 46th minute after his new teammate Bobby Wood completed his debut in the first 45. Have you seen some of the Halilovic footage, Taylor?
Yes. Not from this game, but yes, generally speaking.
In general, I'm kind of excited about the idea of Bobby Wood playing alongside Halilovic. I'm imagining like step over, jink, play the ball through. Bobby Wood runs on, scores.
Yes.
We could have an Alen-Bobby partnership.
And then we could have another Alvaro Morata situation. So that should be fun for a hamburger.
What's an Alvaro Morata?
Just whenever you have a buyback clause for a young, talented player, it's sort of like, this could go really poorly for you. Because even if they don't want him, they can buy him back for $10 million and then sell him for $30.
It's kind of clever on Barcelona's part, isn't
it?
Yeah.
Yes. It's almost like Hamburg haven't noticed the massively inflated transfer fees this summer and think that $10 million is a huge figure, when in reality, not that huge.
Can you imagine them like signing the contract and being like, it's still 2004. Yeah, we're good. Solid.
Speaking of inflated transfers, the Premier League starts this weekend.
The Premier League is back on Saturday and Sunday and Monday, it turns out. We did our whole Premier League preview in part 1, part 2 earlier this week.
We done did.
We made predictions for every single team. Now it's time to look at the actual schedule this weekend. I have the highlights right here, Taylor.
What you got?
So it all starts early Saturday morning. 7:30.
You sound disinterested already.
Well, it's kind of a fascinating dichotomy in the first game. You've got the champions, Leicester City, against Hull City, who are, as we mentioned in our preview, kind of falling apart. Hull City are hosting.
Here's how I'll put this. I think they have a manager. I'm not sure, though.
Yeah.
That's it. That's all I have to say about that.
Well, here's my question for you. Will you be getting up at 7:30 to watch that game?
No. Is my honest answer.
Yeah, it's tough, right? I think I'll DVR it, and if something crazy happens, I'll go back to it. It's not a big test of new Leicester, because it's this kind of team that hasn't got it together. And also it's 7:30 in the morning. That's
and also I think I've slept 15 hours in 3 nights. So I think that factors into my decision to maybe sleep in a bit tomorrow.
Well, the good news is, Saturday, 10 a.m., you've got your choice of Everton v Tottenham or Manchester City. Oh, sorry, no, Everton v Tottenham is the 10 a.m. game.
Yes.
That's one I want to watch.
Okay.
Later that day at 12:30, it's Man City versus Sunderland. You get to see Pep Guardiola's Man City official debut.
Yeah, and I've the hipster pick maybe would be another 10 a.m. game, Middlesbrough-Stoke. Because you've got all of those exciting players that we saw last season in Stoke. You maybe have Jeff Cameron. You have Joe Pirlo. We've talked about that in the preview. The Middlesbrough, with all the signings they've made, you don't really know what they're going to look like. You could have Karanka losing his mind in the first game. So lots of compelling storylines in that match.
And it'll be interesting just to see who Pep Guardiola starts for City in that first game.
Yes.
All right, but really where it's at is Sunday. It's Bournemouth versus Manchester United, 8:30 a.m. Eastern, Sunday morning. And at 11 a.m., it's Arsenal versus Liverpool. That is the game, right?
Yep.
That is the game.
Yep. Yeah, and we'll see what happens in that Liverpool-Arsenal game, because I feel like every season it's either Arsenal look really good in the first game, Wenger's got it figured out, this is the year, or they don't look good in the first game, Wenger out, this is just not working, things have to change.
It's worth noting again, I added a tag at the beginning of our Part 2 preview. The thing I talked about with Arsenal was I was predicting Theo Walcott's going to play up front and bang in a load of goals in Giroud's absence. Apparently, Alexis Sanchez has been starting up front, and Theo Walcott has sort of said he wants to play on the wing. A lot of people sent me that article of Walcott saying, I want to play on the wing. When I read the quotes, it's more like, I want to play on the wing because I guess that's where I'll play the most games. You know what I mean? There's very much like a gun to my head, at least it means I'll play if I'm on the right wing kind of thing.
It's the difference between swagger and like, I'll play where I want to play because I'm the best and I'm going to make goals happen, versus like, please let me play.
Yeah.
like, I'll do whatever. Just let me give it a couple minutes.
But I will say I'm still personally a big proponent of Theo Walcott playing up front. So
I think Liverpool fans might be as well.
Well, they may not be when he runs behind their defence and scores.
I think that's going to be a fascinating game and a crazy exciting game, because you have obviously such talented midfielders on both teams. You've got the high energy, the high pressure of Liverpool, the silky smooth passing of Arsenal. It's going to be definitely a fun one to watch. That's probably the pick of the weekend. No surprises there.
Yeah, Arsenal v Liverpool. Monday, it's going to be Chelsea versus West Ham. That's an interesting derby in and of itself.
Yep.
But here's the thing. We'll be back in this office. Don't squint at me. It's a derby.
I know. I'm squinting because of, I feel like 3 years ago, if you told me that it's going to be West Ham v Chelsea with Antonio Conte and Slaven Bilic, I'd be like, what world are we living in?
Monday, we'll be back in this office and we're going to run through. We won't do one specific game that we zero in on. We're going to do sort of the best of the Premier League. We'll pick our way through the things that we liked, the things that were the most exciting. One final word on all this. We talked about this off air. It's worth remembering not to read too much into the opening weekend. Because like you said, crazy things happen and it's not necessarily indicative of the rest of the season.
Reece Oxford did not go to the Euros. That is my statement to your statement.
Not this time.
Not so much.
Not this time.
Yeah, I should have made that caveat. At some point, he might go to the Euros, and in case I get this prediction.
All right, Taylor, I think ready to wrap this up?
Yes, sir.
Take your weekend off, and by weekend off, I mean we're going to do the Richmond Kickers commentary
Yes.
against Cincinnati on Saturday night. Thank you again to Brian Wiggle. We went deeper into the box that he sent us. All kinds of Cincinnati goodies in there.
I'm pretty sure we can... you're being a little bit liberal with that "we" comment, but sure.
I meant we opened it up and looked in there. Okay, technically only one of us has opened up a bag of barbecue chips and eaten them all on his own. We can't say who that was. We are not at liberty to reveal who that was.
Fair enough.
All right, Taylor, thank you for taking time to talk to me today.
Right back at you.
Thank you.
Easy enough.
It's only polite. Thank you to listeners for taking the time to listen, and we will talk to you again on Monday.